Hashtag Railroad Baron marries runaway nun. Her silent vow makes him build chapels at every stop. The whistle cut through the morning fog, long and mournful. Steam billowed around the locomotive as it slowed at the station, wheels grinding against iron rails. Through the haze, a solitary figure stood at the edge of the platform. A woman in a worn habit, her fingers clutching a tear-stained letter. Her eyes followed the train as it came to rest, the mechanical beast breathing heavily after its journey. Sister Clara Montgomery had made her decision. 5 years of devotion to God, and now she was leaving it all behind. The letter in her hand contained words of disappointment, of shame. The Mother Superior had discovered her doubts, her questions about her calling. There was no place for uncertainty within those stone walls. As passengers disembarked around her, Clara tucked the letter into her small satchel. Inside lay her few possessions, a rosary of simple wooden beads, a prayer book with dog-eared pages, and a small silver cross that had belonged to her mother. She took one last look at the receding fog, then stepped onto the train that would carry her away from everything she had known. The locomotive lurched forward, wheels turning with increasing speed. Clara didn't look back as the Abbey disappeared behind her. She had made a silent promise to herself. She would find a new way to serve, one that didn't require walls to contain her faith. What she couldn't know was how this decision would alter not just her life, but the landscape of an entire railway empire. Gregory Hawthorne sat alone in his office, surrounded by the symbols of his success. Maps covered the walls, each line representing miles of track laid under his command. The Hawthorne Railway Company stretched across 3 states now, connecting towns that had once been isolated from the world. At 42, Gregory had accomplished what most men only dreamed of. His father had left him a single steam engine and 10 miles of track. He transformed that modest inheritance into an empire of iron and coal. The desk before him was mahogany, imported from South America. The carpet beneath his feet had been woven in Persia. Crystal decanters of whiskey caught the late afternoon light streaming through tall windows. Yet for all the opulence, there was something hollow in his gaze as he studied the latest acquisition reports. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, moved mechanically across the pages. The numbers were good. They were always good. Gregory had a mind for business that few could match. He rose from his desk and walked to the window, looking down at the rail yard below. Workers scurried about like ants, loading and unloading cargo. Newly manufactured passenger cars gleamed in the sunlight, their brass fittings polished to a mirror's shine. In the distance, the town of Millbrook sprawled outward from the station, a place that existed primarily to serve the needs of the railway. The contrast was stark between his office and the dusty streets below. While he surrounded himself with luxury, the town struggled to keep pace with the relentless march of progress. Shops opened and closed with alarming frequency. Families came and went, following the promise of work. Only the railway remained constant, its schedule as reliable as the rising sun. Gregory loosened his collar and sighed. Another successful day in a long line of successful days. So why did victory taste increasingly like ash in his mouth? The knock at his door came just as twilight was settling over Millbrook. Gregory had dismissed his secretary hours ago, preferring to work alone into the evening. The sound startled him from his contemplation of quarterly projections. "Enter," he called, straightening his posture. The door opened slowly to reveal a woman he'd never seen before. She wore a simple dark dress, high-necked and modest, but it wasn't the clothing of a servant or a worker's wife. There was something in her bearing that spoke of discipline and purpose. Her hair was pulled back severely, revealing a face that was striking rather than beautiful. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes the color of amber. "Mr. Hawthorne?" Her voice was soft but clear. "I apologize for the intrusion. Your secretary had left, but one of your foremen said you might still be here." Gregory gestured to the chair across from his desk. "And you are?" "Clara Montgomery." She hesitated before adding, "Until recently, Sister Clara of St. Agnes Abbey." That explained the posture, the modest dress. Gregory studied her with new interest. "A nun?" "Former nun, I take it." She nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap. A small satchel rested at her feet. "I've left the order. I'm seeking employment, Mr. Hawthorne. I understand your company sometimes hires women for clerical positions." "We do, though those positions are typically filled through proper channels, not through unannounced evening visits to my office." Despite his words, there was no rebuke in his tone. Something about this woman intrigued him. "I understand. I would have come during business hours, but my train only arrived an hour ago." She met his gaze directly. "I have experience with bookkeeping. The Abbey's accounts were my responsibility for the past 2 years." Gregory leaned back in his chair. Abby, bookkeeping is hardly preparation for managing railway finances, Miss Montgomery. Sister, she started automatically, then corrected herself. Miss Montgomery. And I disagree. The principles are the same, even if the scale differs. Numbers don't change their nature based on who's counting them. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Few people spoke to him with such directness. And why did you leave the Abbey, if I may ask? It seems an unusual decision. Clara's expression remained composed, but something flickered in her eyes. My reasons are personal, Mr. Hawthorne. I can assure you they won't affect my work performance. Gregory nodded slowly. He should send her away, tell her to apply through proper channels tomorrow. Instead, he found himself asking, Do you have accommodations for the night, Miss Montgomery? A brief hesitation. Not yet. I plan to inquire at the boarding house near the station. Mrs. Winter's place? It's full. Railway inspectors are in town this week. Gregory made a decision that surprised even himself. I have a guest house on my property. It's small but comfortable. You're welcome to stay there tonight, and we can discuss potential employment in the morning. Clara studied him, clearly weighing his offer against her limited options. That's very kind, Mr. Hawthorne. I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition. The house sits empty most of the time. He stood and reached for his coat. My driver can take us now, if you're ready. As they rode through Millbrook in Gregory's carriage, Clara gazed out at the town that had grown around the railway. Shops were closing for the evening, their proprietors locking doors and extinguishing lamps. Workers trudged home, their clothes stained with the day's labor. Children played in the dusty streets, making the most of the fading light. Your railway has brought life to this place, Clara observed. Gregory followed her gaze. It's brought commerce. Whether that's the same as life is debatable. You don't sound like a man proud of his accomplishments. I'm proud of what I've built, he said, gesturing toward the rail yard as they passed. But I'm not blind to its costs. Clara turned to study him. What costs do you mean? Gregory was saved from answering as the carriage turned onto a tree-lined drive leading to his estate. The house came into view, a 3-story Victorian mansion with gabled roofs and a wide veranda. Gaslight glowed in the windows, warm against the gathering darkness. Your home is beautiful, Clara said quietly. It's where I live, Gregory replied. I'm not sure I'd call it home. The carriage stopped, and Gregory's driver opened the door. As they walked toward the house, Gregory pointed to a smaller structure set back among the trees. The guest house is there. My housekeeper will have prepared it. There should be everything you need. Clara nodded her thanks. And in the morning? In the morning, we'll see about finding you a position. Perhaps not in bookkeeping initially, but somewhere you can prove your worth. She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the disciplined lines into something luminous. Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne. I won't disappoint you. Gregory watched as she walked toward the guest house, her satchel clutched in one hand. There was something about her straight back and determined stride that suggested she was accustomed to facing challenges head-on. He wondered what had driven her from the Abbey, what personal reasons could compel a woman to abandon such a structured life. As he turned toward his own empty house, Gregory felt something he hadn't experienced in years, curiosity about another person's story. The weeks that followed saw Clara Montgomery become an unexpected fixture in Gregory Hawthorne's world. She began in the mailroom, sorting correspondence for the various departments of the railway company. Within days, her efficiency and attention to detail caught the notice of the department head, who mentioned it to Gregory during their weekly meeting. Gregory wasn't surprised. He'd been watching Clara's progress with interest. There was something methodical about the way she approached every task, breaking it down into manageable parts before proceeding with quiet determination. It reminded him of his own approach to building the railway, one section of track at a time, each piece connecting to form something greater. After 3 weeks, he promoted her to assistant in the scheduling office, where she quickly mastered the complex timetables that governed the movement of every train in the Hawthorne system. By the end of her second month, she was drafting correspondence for his signature, her clear, concise writing style a welcome change from the flowery language his previous assistant had favored. Throughout it all, Clara continued to live in the guest house on Gregory's property. What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something more permanent, though neither of them acknowledged the shift. Each morning, they rode together to the railway offices in Gregory's carriage, discussing the day ahead. Each evening, they returned to their separate dwellings, the distance between mansion and guest house both physical and metaphorical. Yet something was changing in Gregory's empire. Workers noticed it first, The railway baron who had once walked through the yard with barely a glance at the men laying track now stopped to ask about their families, to inquire about working conditions. When a boiler explosion injured 3 men at the Millbrook station, Gregory not only covered their medical expenses but visited each man's home to ensure his family was provided for during his recovery. The change extended beyond the railway. Gregory began attending town council meetings, listening more than speaking. When the local school needed repairs, Hawthorne Railway donated the materials and paid for the labor. When drought threatened the farms surrounding Millbrook, Gregory arranged for water to be transported by rail at no cost to the farmers. And through it all, Clara watched and worked alongside him, her presence a quiet influence that seemed to soften the hard edges of the empire Gregory had built. It was Clara who first suggested the chapels. They were sitting in Gregory's office late one evening, reviewing plans for a new spur line that would connect to a mining town in the mountains. Clara had been with the company for nearly a year by then, her position undefined but essential. She was no longer just an employee. She had become Gregory's confidant, the person whose judgment he trusted most. These mining towns, she said, studying the maps spread across his desk. What's life like for the people there? Gregory looked up from the cost projections he was reviewing. Hard. Isolated. The mines run day and night. Men work until they break, then they're replaced. Clara traced the proposed rail line with her finger. And what will your railway bring them, besides a faster way to transport, or commerce, supplies, mail? Gregory set down his papers. Why do you ask? I was thinking about what makes a community, Clara said, her gaze still on the map. These towns have work. They'll have commerce once the railway comes. But what about their spirits? Where do they go for comfort, for meaning? Gregory leaned back in his chair. Some have churches, I suppose, though many don't. What if, Clara said slowly, what if the Hawthorne Railway built chapels? Small ones, nothing elaborate. Just a place of peace at each stop along the line. Gregory studied her face, noting the way her eyes had taken on a distant look, as if seeing something beyond the office walls. Chapels? That's hardly a standard railway amenity. No, she agreed. But it could be your legacy. Not just connecting towns with iron and steam, but connecting people to something higher. You're still a nun at heart, aren't you? The question was gentle, without mockery. Clara met his gaze. I left the order, not my faith, though I found new ways to express it. Gregory considered her suggestion. It was impractical, an unnecessary expense that would do nothing to increase profits or efficiency. Yet he found himself intrigued by the idea. Small chapels at every stop? They needn't be elaborate. Just simple, peaceful spaces, open to all faiths. Clara's voice grew more animated. Think of it, Gregory. A place where travelers could rest their spirits as well as their bodies. Where workers could find a moment of tranquility in their difficult lives. Gregory found himself nodding. Draft a proposal. Costs, designs, locations. We'll start with the new spur line and see how it's received. Clara's smile was radiant. Thank you. I think you'll find it means more to people than you might expect. What Gregory didn't say, what he hardly admitted to himself, was that he would have agreed to almost anything that brought that light to Clara's eyes. The first chapel was built at the Millbrook station, a simple structure of local stone with clear glass windows and wooden pews that could seat 20 people. There was no ornamentation beyond a small altar and a cross that could be removed for those of different faiths. The only luxury was a bell in the small tower, its clear tone marking the hours between trains. To Gregory's surprise, the chapel was used from the first day. Railway workers stopped in before their shifts. Travelers waiting for connections sat quietly in the pews. Townspeople came during their lunch hours, seeking a moment of peace in their busy days. The second chapel, built at the next stop down the line, was similar in design but used different local materials. Each chapel that followed maintained the same simplicity but reflected the character of its location: stone in the mountains, brick in the manufacturing towns, timber in the forested regions. As the chapels rose along the Hawthorne Railway, something unexpected happened. The railway itself began to be seen differently. No longer just a commercial enterprise, it became known as a company with a conscience, a rare entity that considered the spiritual well-being of the communities it served. And as the railway's reputation changed, so too did the relationship between Gregory and Clara. Their shared vision for the chapels created a bond between them that transcended their professional association. They spent hours discussing designs, selecting locations, even visiting construction sites together. It was during one such visit, standing in the half-built chapel at the mining town of Coleridge, that Gregory realized the depth of his feelings for Clara. She was explaining her idea for a special window that would catch the morning light, illuminating the altar just as the miners were ending their night shifts. "They'll come out of the darkness into light," she said, her hands sketching the path of the sun's rays. A reminder that no matter how deep the mine, there's always light waiting. Gregory watched her, this woman who had once been a nun, now standing amid construction debris in a practical traveling dress, her hair escaping its pins in the mountain breeze. She had transformed his railway, his reputation, his understanding of what his work could mean. And somewhere along the way, she had transformed him. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "would you consider marrying me?" She turned to him, surprise evident in her amber eyes. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Gregory felt a cold fear that he had misread everything between them. Then she smiled, a smile that held both joy and a hint of sadness. "Yes, Gregory. I would be honored to be your wife." It wasn't until later, after they had returned to Millbrook and the news of their engagement had spread through the railway offices like wildfire, that Gregory began to understand the complexity of Clara's acceptance. They were sitting in the garden behind his house, their house now, as Clara had moved from the guest house to a suite of rooms in the mansion. The summer evening was warm, fireflies blinking in the gathering darkness. "There's something I need to explain," Clara said, her hands folded in her lap. "About why I left the Abbey." Gregory waited, giving her the space to find her words. "I told you my reasons were personal, and they were. Are." She looked up at the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. "I didn't leave because my faith faltered. I left because I felt called to serve in a different way." "The chapels," Gregory said, understanding dawning. Clara nodded. "Not specifically the chapels. I couldn't have imagined those then. But I felt confined by the Abbey walls. I believed, I still believe, that faith should be lived in the world, not apart from it." She turned to face him directly. "When I left, I made a vow to myself, a private promise that whatever path I found, I would use it to bring light to others, to create spaces of peace in a world that so often lacks it. And now you've found that path through the railway," Gregory said. "Through our work together." "Yes." Clara reached for his hand. "I love you, Gregory. I want to be your wife. But I need you to understand that my vow is part of who I am. The chapels aren't just buildings to me. They're the fulfillment of a promise I made before God." Gregory squeezed her hand gently. "I would never ask you to break that promise. The chapels will continue. We'll build them at every stop, existing and new." Relief softened Clara's features. "Thank you. Not every man would understand." "I'm not every man," Gregory said with a smile. "And you, Clara Montgomery, are certainly not every woman." They were married in the Millbrook Chapel, a simple ceremony attended by railway workers and townspeople who had come to respect both the Baron and the former nun who had changed the face of the Hawthorne Empire. Clara wore a dress of pale blue rather than traditional white, a nod to her past as a bride of Christ even as she became Gregory's wife. Their marriage was not conventional by the standards of society. Clara maintained her work with the railway, overseeing the chapel program that had grown to include not just buildings but services, reading rooms, simple medical care for travelers, soup kitchens in the poorer towns along the line. Gregory continued to expand the railway, but now with an eye toward how each new connection could serve the communities it touched. Together, they created something neither could have built alone, a business that prospered while improving the lives of those it touched. The Hawthorne Railway became known not just for its efficiency and reach, but for its humanity. For 5 years, they lived and worked in harmony, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. Gregory's business acumen ensured the railway's financial success, while Clara's compassion guided its social impact. The chapels multiplied, each one a testament to their shared vision. Then came the day Gregory found the journal. It was an ordinary Thursday, rain pattering against the windows of their home. Clara had gone to oversee the opening of a new chapel in a town 40 miles down the line. Gregory, catching up on correspondence in his study, needed a particular letter Clara had mentioned. Knowing she kept her papers in a drawer of her writing desk, he went to her sitting room to look for it. The letter wasn't there, but beneath a stack of railway reports lay a small leather-bound book. Gregory recognized it as the journal Clara sometimes wrote in during quiet evenings. He should have closed the drawer then, respecting her privacy. But a loose page caught his eye, a sheet covered in Clara's neat handwriting, dated 5 years earlier, just before she had come to Millbrook. Gregory hesitated, then carefully unfolded the page. "Today I leave St. Agnes," the entry began. "Mother Superior gave me one last chance to reconsider, but my mind is made up. I cannot stay within these walls while my heart calls me elsewhere. Sister Margaret says I am abandoning my vows, but she doesn't understand. I am not abandoning my service to God. I am seeking a new way to fulfill it. I have prayed for guidance, and last night I dreamed of railway tracks stretching across the land, connecting people and places. In my dream, I walked beside the tracks, planting seeds that grew into something I couldn't quite see. When I woke, I knew my path led to the railway. I have heard of the Hawthorne Railway Company. They say its owner is a hard man, driven by profit alone. Perhaps that is where I am needed most, to bring light to a place of darkness. I make this vow, wherever this journey takes me, I will create spaces of peace and reflection. I will serve God by serving those the world has forgotten. Gregory carefully refolded the page and replaced it in the journal. His hands trembled slightly as he closed the drawer. Clara had come to him with a purpose, a vision that predated their meeting. Had she seen him as merely a means to an end? A tool to fulfill her vow? He walked to the window, watching rain stream down the glass. The man Clara had described in her journal, hard, driven by profit alone, was that how she had seen him? Was that still how she saw him, beneath the changes of the past 5 years? When Clara returned that evening, Gregory said nothing about the journal. He listened to her enthusiastic description of the new chapel, nodded at appropriate moments, answered her questions about his day. But a distance had opened between them, invisible but palpable. Over the following weeks, that distance grew. Gregory found himself watching Clara with new eyes, questioning her motives, wondering if her affection for him was genuine or merely expedient for her mission. Clara, sensitive to the change in him, asked more than once if something was wrong. Each time, Gregory denied it, unwilling or unable to confront the doubts that plagued him. The railway continued to prosper. The chapels continued to rise at each stop along the expanding lines. But the harmony between them had fractured, replaced by a careful politeness that was more painful than open conflict would have been. It might have continued that way indefinitely, this slow drifting apart, if not for the fever. It began innocuously enough. Clara complained of fatigue, of a headache that wouldn't subside. Gregory, still wrapped in his private hurt, suggested she rest for a few days. By the time he realized the seriousness of her condition, the fever had taken hold with frightening intensity. The doctor was summoned, then specialists from the city. Diagnosis followed diagnosis: influenza, pneumonia, an infection of unknown origin. Whatever its cause, the fever burned through Clara with relentless force, leaving her weaker with each passing day. Gregory sat by her bedside, all thoughts of the journal forgotten in the face of possibly losing her. He held her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness, her skin hot and dry beneath his touch. He read to her when she was lucid, prayed beside her when she wasn't. On the 7th day of her illness, as rain lashed against the windows in an echo of the day he'd found her journal, Clara opened her eyes with a clarity that had been absent for days. "Gregory," she whispered, her voice a pale shadow of itself. "You're here." "Of course I'm here." He squeezed her hand gently. "Where else would I be?" She studied his face, her amber eyes fever-bright. "You've been distant. Before I fell ill." Gregory looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "It doesn't matter now. All that matters is you getting well." "It does matter." Clara's fingers tightened weakly around his. "Something changed. I need to know what." Gregory hesitated, then decided that if these were to be their last conversations, they should at least be honest once. "I found your journal. A page from before you came to Millbrook. You wrote about me, about the railway baron driven by profit, about bringing light to darkness." Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. "You thought I used you, that I married you to fulfill my vow." "The thought occurred to me," Gregory admitted. "You came to me with a purpose that had nothing to do with me personally." Clara closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. "I came to Millbrook with a purpose, yes. But I fell in love with you, Gregory Hawthorne. Not with what you could do for my mission. With you, your mind, your hidden compassion, the man beneath the railway baron." She paused, her breathing labored. "The chapels became our shared vision. Something neither of us could have created alone. That's what marriage should be. Two people building something greater together than either could build separately." Gregory felt tears burning behind his eyes. "I've been a fool." "No," Clara whispered. "Just human. Doubting, questioning. That's part of any faith journey. Even faith in each other." She drifted into sleep then, her hands still clasped in his. Gregory remained beside her, watching the rise and fall of her chest, each breath a small victory against the fever that consumed her. 3 more days passed, days of desperate hope alternating with despair. The doctors spoke in hushed tones of preparing for the worst. Gregory refused to leave Clara's side. sleeping in the chair beside her bed, eating only when the housekeeper insisted. On the morning of the 11th day, Clara woke with the fever broken. Her recovery would be slow, the doctors warned, but she had turned the corner. Gregory wept then, unashamed tears of relief and gratitude. As Clara regained her strength over the following weeks, something shifted between them. The distance that had grown before her illness dissolved, replaced by a deeper understanding. They spoke openly about the journal, about Gregory's doubts, about Clara's vow, and what it meant to both of them now. "I want to show you something," Clara said one afternoon, when she was strong enough to sit in the garden. She handed Gregory a small key. "In my writing desk, the bottom drawer. There's a box." Gregory returned with a wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl. The key turned smoothly in the lock, revealing a collection of small notebooks, Clara's journals from the past 5 years. "Read them," she said simply. "All of them. Then you'll understand." Over the next several evenings, Gregory read Clara's private thoughts, chronicled from her arrival in Millbrook to the present. He read of her initial impression of him. Cold, yes, but with an untapped capacity for compassion she glimpsed even in their first meeting. He read of her growing admiration for his intelligence, his vision, his hidden kindness toward those who worked for him. He read of her confusion as she realized her feelings for him were deepening beyond professional respect, of her struggle to reconcile these feelings with her past as a nun, of her joy when he proposed, mixed with fear that marriage might somehow compromise her vow to create spaces of peace. And he read of her love for him, honest, complex, human love that acknowledged his flaws while cherishing his strengths. Love that had grown alongside their shared work, not in spite of it or because of it, but intertwined with it in ways neither of them had anticipated. When he finished the last journal, Gregory sat for a long time in his study, watching the sun set over the railway yard in the distance. Trains came and went, their whistles marking time as they had since he'd built the first line. But now each whistle also marked the presence of a chapel, a place of quiet in the midst of commerce and motion. He returned the journals to Clara, who was sitting up in bed, her color much improved. "I understand now," he said simply. Clara reached for his hand. "The fever changed something in me, Gregory. I've been thinking about mortality, about legacy, about what remains when we're gone." Gregory sat beside her on the bed. "The railway will remain. The chapels. Yes." Clara's gaze was distant. "But I've been thinking beyond buildings and businesses. About the people whose lives we touch. The communities we serve." "What are you suggesting?" "An expansion of our work. Not just chapels, but schools, hospitals, places that serve the whole person, body, mind, and spirit." Her eyes met his, bright with renewed purpose. "The Hawthorne Foundation. A way to ensure that what we've built together continues, whether we're here to oversee it or not." Gregory considered her words. A foundation would require significant funding, a restructuring of the railway's profits. "Yes," Clara agreed. "Is that a problem?" Gregory smiled, squeezing her hand. "Not at all. It's the next logical step in our journey." The Hawthorne Foundation was established the following spring, endowed with a substantial portion of the railway's profits. Its mission was simple but far-reaching, to create spaces of peace, learning, and healing in communities served by the railway. The chapels were just the beginning. As Clara regained her strength, she took an active role in the Foundation's work, traveling with Gregory to communities along the line, listening to local needs, adapting their vision to serve each unique situation. In some towns, they built schools. In others, small hospitals or clinics. In all, they maintained the chapels that had been the seed of their shared mission. Years passed. The railway expanded, connecting more communities, bringing commerce and opportunity to isolated regions. But unlike other railways of the era, the Hawthorne Line was known for more than just its efficiency or reach. It was known for the chapels that stood at every stop, for the schools and hospitals that often followed, for the way it served the whole community, not just its commercial interests. Gregory and Clara grew older together, their partnership deepening with each passing year. The doubts that had once threatened to separate them became part of their shared story, a reminder of the human capacity for misunderstanding and reconciliation. Then came the day, 15 years after Clara had first appeared in Gregory's office, when the doctors delivered news they couldn't soften with hopeful words. The fever that had nearly taken Clara years before had weakened her heart. It was failing now, gradually but inexorably. Months remained, perhaps a year if she was very fortunate. Gregory received the news with outward calm, thanking the doctors for their honesty. Only when they had gone did he allow himself a moment of raw grief, alone in his study with the door locked against the world. Clara, characteristically, faced her prognosis with the same quiet strength she had brought to every challenge. "We all die, Gregory," she said when he finally shared his grief with her. "The question is what we leave behind." In the months that followed, they worked together to ensure the foundation's future. They established a board of trustees, created endowments, documented their vision for generations to come, and they visited as many chapels as Clara's failing strength would allow, sitting side by side in the simple pews, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing memories of each location's construction. It was during one such visit, at the original Millbrook Chapel, that Clara turned to Gregory with a request. "When I'm gone," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I want to be remembered not just in stone or brass plaques. I want my journals to be placed in the chapels, one in each, spread across the railway. Let my words continue the work when I no longer can." Gregory nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "And one more thing," Clara continued. "Build one final chapel at the end of the line. Wherever the railway reaches its furthest point, place my last journal there, the one I'm writing now. A reminder that every journey has an end, but also that new beginnings are always possible." Winter came early that year, snow blanketing the countryside by late November. Clara's strength waned with the shortening days. She moved from their bedroom to a hospital bed set up in the sunroom, where she could watch the railway yard even on days when she was too weak to leave the house. On a clear December morning, with sunlight sparkling on fresh snow, Clara asked to be taken to the Millbrook Chapel one last time. Gregory arranged for a carriage with extra blankets, carrying Clara himself from the house to the waiting vehicle. The chapel was empty when they arrived, the morning sun streaming through the clear glass windows, illuminating the simple altar. Gregory settled Clara in a pew near the front, wrapping blankets around her thin shoulders. "It's just as I imagined it," Clara said, her gaze taking in the space they had created together all those years ago. A place of peace. Gregory sat beside her, taking her hand in his. It felt so small now, so fragile, the bones prominent beneath paper-thin skin. "The first of many, but still my favorite." Clara leaned against him, her breathing shallow but steady. "Do you remember what I wrote in my journal? About bringing light to darkness. I remember. I was wrong about you, you know. You weren't darkness. You were light waiting to be uncovered." She squeezed his hand with what little strength remained to her. "We found our light together." They sat in silence then, watching dust motes dance in the sunbeams, listening to the distant sounds of the railway yard, the hiss of steam, the clang of metal, the occasional whistle marking a departure or arrival. "I'm tired, Gregory," Clara said finally. "I think it's time to go home." Gregory carried her back to the carriage, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of glass. By the time they reached the house, she was too weak to walk. He carried her to the sunroom, settling her on the hospital bed as the doctor was summoned. But both Gregory and Clara knew no doctor could change what was coming. The railway baron sat beside his wife as the winter sun began its early descent, holding her hand as her breathing grew more labored. "Continue the work, my love," Clara whispered as twilight gathered in the corners of the room. "Promise me." "I promise," Gregory said, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Every stop, every town. The chapels will continue." Clara smiled faintly, her eyes closing. "Not just the chapels. The work. Bringing light." She didn't speak again. As darkness fell over Millbrook, Clara Montgomery Hawthorne slipped away, her hands still clasped in her husband's, her face peaceful in the soft lamplight. Gregory kept his promise. In the months following Clara's death, he threw himself into the work of the foundation, personally overseeing the placement of her journals and chapels across the railway system. Each one was carefully bound in leather, a small brass plate identifying it as the thoughts of Clara Montgomery Hawthorne, a light along the way. And he built the final chapel, at the furthest reach of the Hawthorne Railway, a point high in the western mountains where the line ended at a small mining community. Unlike the other chapels, this one was built of glass and steel, its transparent walls offering views of the magnificent landscape in every direction. At its center, on a simple pedestal, rested Clara's final journal, open to her last entry. "Every journey has a destination, but the tracks we lay along the way determine what world we create as we travel. Build tracks of compassion. Create stations of peace. And remember that the greatest legacy we leave is not in buildings or businesses, but in the lives we touch and the light we bring to dark places." 5 years after Clara's death, on a crisp autumn morning, Gregory Hawthorne stood alone at the side of that final chapel. He was an old man now, his hair white, his shoulders slightly stooped, but his eyes were clear as he gazed at the structure gleaming in the morning light. From his pocket, He drew a small package wrapped in silk. Unwrapping it carefully, he revealed Clara's rosary, the simple wooden beads she had carried from the abbey. He placed it beside her journal, arranging the beads in a circle around the open pages. "The work continues, Clara," he said quietly. "Just as you wanted." In the distance, a train whistle sounded, long, clear notes echoing across the mountains. Gregory smiled at the familiar sound. Once it had signaled only commerce, the movement of goods and people. Now it marked something more, the presence of chapels, of schools, of hospitals, of light spreading along iron tracks across the land. The old railway baron stood for a moment longer in the chapel of glass and steel, surrounded by the legacy he and Clara had built together. Then he turned and walked back toward the waiting train, his steps slow but purposeful. Behind him, sunlight streamed through the chapel walls, illuminating Clara's journal and rosary. And above the door, engraved in simple letters, were the words that had guided their shared journey. "A vow made in silence is louder than any promise. Total _char_count, 27,849.